lovelies! Today it's finally here. I know you've been asking for it. I know I've been promising it and talking about it. It is time to do a full Beamo extensive review. It's been about 8 months now, so I actually have a lot to talk about today. I know this is going to be a long video because I have a lot of information that I feel is not in video form on the internet yet, and a lot of my personal experiences that I think will help you if you're trying to decide whether you want to buy a Beamo or if you're a first-time laser cut user and you just purchased your Beamo. So lots of information. I'm going to break it down into categories to make it nice and easy for you, those of you who don't have time to watch this entire video. I'm going to link the timestamps in the description box below and in the comment section so you can easily jump ahead. Before you do that, because I know some of you probably already scrolling down, just a couple of things about this video. Please just give me like 30 seconds of your time. So me filming today is me in February of 2021. I have filmed this video 4 times. Things keep happening that I want to add to the video and then I refilm. Rather than refilming the entire thing and delaying this video another 2 weeks, I wanted to just pop in and fix things. So you're going to be switching back and forth. The majority of the information is going to be me from a month ago at the beginning of January 2021 before disaster struck. Me today is in my new studio. Me then is in my under construction tiny home, which is where my Beamo is going to live. Second thing, this video is really long. I've put a lot of time and energy and effort into it, and so even though I don't normally put ads in the middle of my videos because I find it really distracting as a viewer, I did put an ad in the middle of this video. If you have the time, if you don't get one of those 20-minute ads, if they're just a couple minutes long, I would really appreciate it if you watch the ad all the way through, because right now I don't have a lot of sponsors on this channel, and that's how I'm making revenue to keep making these helpful videos. So if you could just give me a few minutes of your time, I would really appreciate it. If you don't have the time, that's okay. I totally understand. I just thought I'd ask for it since I don't normally, like I said, put ads in the middle of my videos, but this one has taken so much time to put together. One more thing. I just want to mention really briefly, I've started live streaming on Twitch. This is something new for me. Artist Explores the World is the handle, at Artist Explores the World on Twitch. Even if I'm not talking about laser cut art, even if I'm not working on art, if I am live at any time, feel free to jump on and ask me questions about my machine. Alright, so let's jump right into it. For those of you that saw my first video, you already know that I was a completely new laser cut creator. I previously outsourced my laser cutting, so I did have some experience with the after product and how to set up an SVG file, but other than that, I didn't have any experience with the actual cutting of the material. Woo! Today it is raining, and I hope it is not too loud, but we have a tarp attached to the outside of the bus right now, and it is whipping! The first thing I want to talk about is the materials that I've used and how many hours I've used. So I'm more of like a hobbyist in the sense that I'm not using the Beamo every single day, multiple days a week. I only use it probably 1 to 2 days a week, only for a couple of hours a week, I would say. Overall, I've put about 40 to 50 hours on my machine so far, and I have created thousands of jewelry pieces, and I think I'm up to about 25 fine art pieces. I've worked on a couple of DIY tutorials. I will link the playlist in the description box below. So that's what I've used my Beamo for so far. I am not using it for signs or for generic looking home decor. There's no problem with using it for that. The only problem you have is obviously the bed size is relatively small. So far for materials, I have used wood and paper, and I started to use leather, but I really wasn't happy with the results, so I'm hoping to expand upon that. That's another DIY tutorial that's going to be coming, because I'm going to be working on doing some luggage tag, some DIY leather luggage tags. Paper, it actually works pretty amazing for that. I'm starting to do my new earring holders in watercolor paper, and so I've been engraving and cutting watercolor paper in the bed, and that has been working just fine. Predominantly I've used wood. I use Baltic birch. I've also engraved on wood slices. So I bought wood slices off of Amazon, a pack of like 25 to 30 or something like that, and I've been laser engraving those. All of that has worked fantastic. The Baltic birch I've purchased from an Etsy seller, Z Wooden Laser. They're pretty good. I would say they're definitely reasonably priced. You can also get cheaper wood from obviously Home Depot, Lowe's, those kind of places, and cut it down yourself if you have the tools available to you. But it's easier for me to just order it pre-cut to the bed size. They're mostly done for Glowforge sizes, because obviously Glowforges are a little bit more popular, so I find that it's easier to find Glowforge sizes. However, they do have some 8x10s, and I've been using actually some 9x11s, or 8.5x11, so it's like a standard paper size in America. And I've been using those, and they fit in the machine. You can't cut all the way to the edges with the Beamo, but all you have to do is just shift it. So I do like the bottom half, and then I shift it, and then I cut the top half. I have noticed that if the plywood starts to bow, then you do need to hold it down with some sort of magnets. And I've also seen little honeycomb sticks that people have used to like hold the pieces down on either end so that the plywood stays flat, so it cuts nice and evenly. I haven't had to do that too much. I've only had probably, I would say, a couple of pieces that have warped over time that were at the bottom of the box from Wood and Laser. So something that has popped up more is the last batch that I got from Wood and Laser kind of had a lot more warped pieces. The box did sit for a while, and it did sit on in my tiny home, so it could have been the inclement weather that we've had that warped it. I don't know if it came warped from them or if it warped in the box in my studio, so I don't want to blame them, but I'm just saying I got a batch that was kind of like 50% of the pieces were really warped. Something I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner was I just made sure when I make my designs I leave the corners empty, and then I duct tape the corners down to the metal frame, and it's worked perfectly. It holds the piece flat, allows me to cut, and most of the pieces I'm making, it doesn't matter if they're warped because they're so tiny that it doesn't make a huge difference. If you were cutting a huge piece, it might make a little bit of a difference because once it cuts, it's going to continue to warp, so unless you're gluing it to something with clamps, you might find that that doesn't work for you. But for me, the duct tape, super cheap, super easy, and works. Something I didn't talk about in the last footage was metal. So I have worked on like very thin metal. I don't have the metal attachment. There is a metal attachment that you can buy. It's only available in certain countries. I'm not sure if it's available in the US. I'll put it on the screen if it is. That allows you to engrave on metal. I personally don't have that. However, I still have found that it will do a soft, what I would call a soft engraving. It's more like a scratching. My husband has done it on his knives, and I have also done it on a few little metal jewelry pieces. It's not a deep engrave, it's not a true engrave, I think, and so it could fade over time really easily with wear and tear, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend the Beamo for metal. You might be able to play with the settings and do a little bit better job than I did, but you really should buy the metal attachment if you're looking to do more extensive metal cutting and engraving. If you are not designing your own SVGs, there are plenty of SVG files already available on Etsy, and there's sellers that specifically design and sell just the files that they make. You'll find that a lot of times you're then getting into the situation where you're competing with other laser cutters when you're using those SVG files, but a lot of people had a lot of success this Christmas with excuse my language for those that don't like swearing, fuck flakes, which are snowflakes made out of the word fuck with 2020 in the middle, which were hilarious and very, very, very popular. Many sellers made thousands of dollars off of those this past year, so this past Christmas. So you know, there's totally room for, if you don't feel comfortable being a designer, you can obviously use these designs that are available for you in SVGs. One thing I will note, and this is not particularly a review of the machine, but laser cut community in general, is that there seems to be a lot of people who think it's okay to steal other people's designs or steal other people's work without paying for it, and that does get a little frustrating. I don't particularly like sharing a lot of my designs or a lot of my things with the laser cut community, because then people think it's perfectly okay to steal something that I designed and came up with myself. And as a fine artist, that just baffles me, because artists are supposed to have respect for other artists, especially in a community that's working in similar genres. So I just really don't understand that at all, and that's not something that I'm used to, but it just depends, I guess, on who you are and what you're comfortable with. I personally would not feel okay stealing other people's ideas, and I don't think it's okay to steal my ideas, just putting it out there. I make DIYs so that people can learn and do their own things that are similar, but I always encourage people to add their own twist or to change things up. Legally, I think you have to change it up to 25% or 20% for it not to be a copyrighted product, and I do copyright and trade all of my products. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're not a creative person. Just be careful of who you're taking from. The camera on the Beamo makes it really easy to line things up. I would say mine is probably just maybe like a few millimeters off, nothing substantially off. It works really well. I have seen some people who have had some problems with the camera alignment on any objects that aren't flat. If they have a little bit of a rotation to them, then the camera can get a little bit tricky and it's not as accurate as if the object is flat. But since I'm using predominantly plywood that's flat, it works just pretty well. I didn't get the autofocus feature, so adjusting the focus is something that I have to do. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal. You just line it up with a little plastic piece. I have noticed though that on my machine, and I've seen other people who don't have this on their machine, so I don't know if that has to do with the autofocus feature versus not having the autofocus feature. But the little plastic piece and the metal piece right next to the laser, as you can see here, that piece gets really corroded and heats up and has caught fire before. But it wasn't like substantial fire. It was just a tiny little flame, and I was able to open the lid and it came right out. Hi there. This was because I was missing a fan. So I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about the awful event that happened to me a little bit later in this video. But I did not have, there's a little hose that comes down to the tip of the laser. I will show it on the screen if I have a picture of it. I'm pretty sure I do. And that is supposed to be an additional fan for your laser. And I did not know, because I can't put my hand in there when it's cutting, that fan was not on. It must have come in, the wires for it must have come loose when it was shipped to me, or they came loose from the factory, I'm not sure. But when my massive situation happened where I had to open up the entire laser, my husband discovered that was not connected. So now that fan has been reconnected, all I had to do was just tighten those wires, like fiddle them around, tighten the connection. That fan is working. My Beamo's a little bit louder than it was prior, but there's so much less flashback. So if your fan comes right out of the box working, you probably won't have those burning issues that I have had. I have had to clean out my machine. I'll show you a little bit of that process. I found it to be pretty easy. I followed the step-by-step instructions that are available on Flux's website. I had no problems. The only thing that was kind of like user error was I kind of lost track of which side was the correct side of the lens. One side is more flat than the other, and it was really hard to tell the difference, but I was able to lay it down on a paper towel and really study it each side and then determine which one was the more rounded side, and then put it back in, and I was right. It worked just fine, luckily. So I would say the only thing to watch out for is when you're taking out the lens, to just make sure that it is the correct side and you keep track of which side is which. That was my bad. Next, I want to talk about the main reason why I waited to do this video until I was here in my tiny home, and that is ventilation. If you watched the first video, you'll remember that before I was not properly venting my machine. I was just taking the tube and throwing it out the window and trying to close the window as best as I could, and it was not an ideal situation. During the summer, it was alright because I just stuck a fan in the window and had the fan blowing air out of the room, out of the house, and that would keep a lot of the smell down, but I still would have to wear a respirator mask because I was getting sore throats and stuffed up noses from the chemicals that were coming back in. Now that it is in the bus, it is being properly vented outside of the bus. It has the same tube setup, but instead of just heading right out of the house, there's also a ventilation flap that is kind of like a dryer vent, is really what it's supposed to be for, and because we are in the colder temperatures, I do obviously have to keep the bus heated so that the water doesn't freeze. We are in New Hampshire, so that is something, if you are in a northern region, you have to make sure that your ventilation is properly insulated or covered when you're not using it. I have heard horror stories of the cold air coming up the tube and the ventilation and freezing your water pipe and then cracking it, and your machine is done. So do not do that. Watch out for that. So here it is, my massive horror story. So I knew this, right? I gave you all the advice. My machine was doing great in 20 degrees, 10 degrees. It's going fine. Got down to the negatives with the wind chill. Not doing fine. So unfortunately, my laser tube froze, and when it froze, it shattered. Cue total mental breakdown and total lost it. Very upset, lots of crying, very frustrated with myself because I knew this was a possibility and I thought I had done enough to protect my machine, but I obviously had not. We were running a heater in the tiny home. I think a big problem was that even though we have insulation in the walls and insulation in the cabinets and insulation on the bottom of the cabinets, the heater is up at the top, the Beamo is down on ground level almost, and so I think the temperature difference between the top of the bus and the bottom of the bus were completely different. Or it was just the negative wind chill blowing up the tube. Maybe I should have disconnected the tube and put more an insulated blanket on it. I know a couple of things I've read now. I have read some people put antifreeze in their water. To me, I'm really nervous about that. I don't understand the chemical properties and how that works. I would be nervous to do that, so I'm not going to do that. But that's something that I heard as a possible solution for those of you up north. Two, the other thing is a heated blanket, but to me that sounds like a massive fire hazard to leave a heated blanket on all the time in an area that is not constantly monitored. So I'm not going to do that, but that's another solution that I have seen. Third thing I have seen is just making sure you unplug everything and pull the tube out from the outside, and that is what I'm doing now. I've brought the Beamo with the new laser into the house, and I have it in a window in our living room. It's not convenient for right now, but it works for now before we actually move on to the bus. Once we're back on the bus full time, it's not going to be an issue because we're not going to be in these temperatures. We're going to be in much warmer temperatures, much warmer climate, and the setup that I have is going to work fine for that. I don't plan to be in the negatives, and if I do, we're going to be heating the bus more than we would anyways because we're going to be living in it. So that's all something to keep in mind if you live in a northern climate like I do, that this is going to be a problem. You definitely need to address it because it's a very serious issue. Now luckily my machine did not break all the way. I have seen machines that have completely frozen all of the components on the inside. That did not happen to me. The only thing that happened was that the water froze in the laser tube, ruining the laser tube. Unfortunately, that means that I can't now tell you how many hours I got out of my in-the-box tube, which really sucks because and also it was a business expense, which I wasn't expecting, but overall, I found that the laser tube was sold out in a lot of places. I ended up finding a company, I'm going to put it on the screen, I think it's 3D something, but I don't want to misquote, I'll put it on the screen. I ordered from them because they were in stock. They were a little bit, I think like $15 to $20 more expensive. I paid another $20 for expedited shipping. They shipped my order within 48 hours. I want to say it was less than 48 hours because I ordered on the weekend. They're not open on the weekends. They shipped it out on Monday, but I think it actually left the location on Tuesday, and then it got to me by Friday. So I was really impressed. I was very happy with them. Everything was packaged really well. The laser was perfect. It's worked great. I actually think it's more powerful than the in-the-box laser that I had, just based off of my current settings, but I've only had it for 2 weeks now, so I can't say for sure if that's the truth or not. I don't know, but it seems to be that way. This also means that we then had to change the laser out and also change out the water because the water was completely frozen and grody. Changing out the water was much simpler than I thought. For some reason, I thought there was a lot more water than there was. Like, I bought a gallon of distilled water to change it out. I only ended up using about not even half of that gallon of water to fill up the water system, so you don't need to buy a whole gallon. It was super easy. 2 of the tubes before the filter got kind of grody, so I actually took one of my, it's a straw cleaner. I didn't use any soap on it because I wasn't sure how the soap would interact with the actual machine. I just used warm water, and I used that to scrub some of the grime out of the tubes, and that's how I cleaned those. Put fresh water in it. I say me, but Corey helped me with a lot of this. He did a majority of switching out the laser. He used a video and his own prior knowledge to do so. I don't feel like there needs to be any other corrections or anything like that, so I would just follow the directions that they have on their website. I filmed a little bit of it, but not a lot of it, and so I don't feel it's necessary to walk you through the entire process. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. When we did this is how I figured out that the fan was not working. Actually, I should say Corey figured it out, because in the directions it talked about flushing out your fans, and there was no fan. Like, when you hit the button on the machine to run the fan for the actual tube, it wasn't working. So this is when we discovered that problem that I didn't even realize I had. That fixes some of the issues that I talked about with the smell and with the burning of the pieces on the inside. So you may or may not have that problem. It's something to keep in mind. I think my laser cutter is cutting even smoother and better than it was prior, and that's another reason why I can't say if the tube is cutting better, or if we fix this fan problem it's cutting better. I can't say which it was, because it happened at the same time. Now that it's properly ventilated, I am still getting a little bit of the smell. The one thing about my Beamo that I really wish I could change was that there is a gap between the edge of the metal and the cover, like you see here. I'm going to show you. And that does cause a little bit of smell to leak out when it is working, and that's still very irritating to my throat, so I have to be very careful, and I still wear a mask. I'm hoping to actually invest in a secondary machine, or fan I should say, that will suck more of the air out, and I'm hoping that will keep down on the smell. But overall it's not awful, but it's just not perfect yet. But I have seen people who have had better systems than I have, who have absolutely no smell when they're cutting. This ventilation issue, part of that, it's definitely been reduced since we fixed that fan issue that I talked about earlier. So smell is even less. There still is a slight smell. I am very, very sensitive to that. I still stand by the fact that I want to upgrade my fan system. Obviously, your materials that you're using are going to have a huge effect on what you're going to be smelling. It's just something to keep in mind. I've also had a lot of questions about whether there's a smell outside, and I would say 100% yes, there is. So I wouldn't recommend a Beamo or any kind of laser cutter for apartment living. As far as speed goes, I've obviously played around a lot more with the speed and power options and figuring out which works best for the material that I'm using. It does take a little bit of experimenting, but once you kind of get the handle on things of what the material you're using is and what the power and speed are, it's really easy to just then save your own presets and know what they are and enter them in. I found the defaults do kind of work, but they tend to run a little hot for my machine, so I actually turn the power down quite about 5 to 10% on my machine. Versus the defaults for wood, for cutting and engraving. I found that gives a nicer result for what I'm looking for. Personally, there is masking that you could do, and then it wouldn't quite matter as much, because if you're getting a lot of burn marks, it would just be on the masking tape and then you could pull the masking off. But I actually prefer to sand over masking, because I'm working with thousands and thousands of tiny little pieces, and getting all of the masking off of those pieces is tedious and annoying, and it's faster to just take the jewelry pieces and quickly sand them off on a sanding block before I start painting them. So honestly, I don't mask my pieces, but that may be something that you would want to do, especially if you're doing the more home decor-y type stuff that's bigger pieces or a solid ornament. Then you could just peel the masking off of one big piece, and that would be more beneficial and faster for you. So that's all part of building your own method, but either works with the Beamo just fine. I'm very happy with the software. I would say it can be kind of buggy. This is the Beam Studio that I'm talking about. It comes native with the Beamo and Beambox products. They are updating it and they answer questions and there is troubleshooting. I have noticed with the most recent Beam Studio update that the software determines how long it takes to cut. And I'm not quite sure because I've heard mixed opinions on whether this is normal. Like normally the machine's software, not the software on your computer, should be dictate like in other instances, not on a Beamo. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about other laser cutters to be able to definitively say this for sure, but I've noticed with the most recent update, my cutting and engraving is getting a faster cut and engrave time with the new Beam Studio, which makes me think that the software is what determines how long it takes. Something to keep in mind. I also noticed they did change the natural default presets. I'm still knocking them down because with my new laser that I received, it still seems to be too high, but they did knock the defaults down, so I'm not knocking it down as much as I was prior to this. It's definitely something to keep in mind and play around with in the software. See if you can get your time reduced. I also have noticed, and I didn't mention this, I don't remember if I mentioned this in the first video, I started to play around with how clean my SVG files were. If you do not have clean SVG files, it will definitely increase the time. So if you're filling out a whole 8.5 by 11 sheet with a bunch of little pieces, lots of engraving, and it's saying it's going to take an hour, you really should look at your SVG files, make sure they're clean, make sure the points are continuous, make sure there's not any issues with the SVG file itself, because if there's something wrong with your SVG file, then it will increase your speed time. I'm finding an entire sheet with lots of little pieces, lots of little details, should take anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes. And anytime it goes over 45 minutes, that's when I know that there's something wrong with the file itself, not necessarily the Beam Studio or the laser cutter. So again, something to keep in mind. One last thing about the software is just that I would recommend waiting a few weeks before you download the latest version, as they usually have bugs in the first patches, and I prefer to use older versions that are working just fine and are much more stable. I think they kind of release some of the studio updates a little too early and then they have problems. So that's just something to keep in mind, that if you download a new patch and you start having issues, then revert back to an older patch, because it can be a little glitchy sometimes. But overall, I'm really impressed with it being, a software that's included with the machine. It works really well with Adobe Illustrator. I make all of my designs in Adobe Illustrator, and then I convert them to SVG files and then import them into the Beamo using the color option, because I prefer to have all of my work in color. I use blue lines for cutting, red lines for engraving, and then black fill for monochromatic engraving. So that's what I use for my machine, and that is a process that was developed because those were the constraints that I had to send when I was outsourcing my laser cutting. So I'm just already used to using that method, and that's what I'm comfortable with. I would say customer service has been phenomenal. I haven't had to use them a ton, but when I have had to use them, they've been very responsive. It's also super fun. I'm in communications with Flux a little bit, and I've been featured on their social media, so it's been really fun to kind of show off my projects with Flux, and they love seeing what you create with your machine, and they're happy to give you little bits of a promotion if you're willing to share some of your projects with them. So that has been a really fun collaboration that they contacted me. I didn't even contact them, so that was really, really exciting. So I appreciate a company that notices when people are using their products and is responsive to people using their products, and listens to feedback. I think that's really crucial and important, and it gives it, for me personally, it builds a lot of brand loyalty, so I really do appreciate that. The Facebook group that I mentioned in my first video, I'm going to link that also in the description box below still, because I do think that probably is one of the best resources. It is actually managed by the customer service department of Flux, and if you have a problem with your Beamo, you can get obviously other customer feedback, which might be a little bit faster, but they respond to comments and they respond to critiques and everything. So just, amazing customer service in that sense. I really appreciate it. I love networking with other Beamo people. That has been a lot of fun. And it seems to be a lot of people that are into more experimental stuff and not necessarily the cookie cutter generic stuff that a lot of Glowforge groups have. Again, nothing wrong with the cookie cutter generic stuff. Those people are making thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars doing designs, but that's just not my scene or my genre. So it's just something that I've noticed. Overall, I've been very happy with my Beamo. I think it's absolutely perfect for me. Its small size and portability makes it perfect for my tiny home. If I was living in a bigger home, I probably would invest in the Beam box, just because having a larger bed size allows you to make more projects and do more things. But that is just unrealistic for my living space. And so the Beamo has been absolutely perfect for my jewelry business and pretty awesome for my fine art business as well. I've had a lot of interest in my projects and creations, and I've already made back my money more. I've actually doubled my money in the last 8 months of having it. So I've made more than enough to cover the cost of the machine and make it worthwhile, considering it's going to last a long time. Something that hasn't happened to me yet, but that has happened to other people, is that the original laser tubes that came out with the first Beamos were not up to par with what they should normally be. I'm not sure why that is, and honestly, I don't know if that's my case. I noticed that a lot of the people who are having the problems with laser tubes dying with under 100 hours were people who ordered their Beamos from the Kickstarter. So I did notice that those people did have, their machines look slightly different, and they also are having a little bit more issues with certain things. I've also seen that some people have had misaligned lasers right out of the box, where the laser actually is pointing in the wrong direction when it first starts up. So which I believe comes from having misaligned mirrors, but don't quote me on that. I have not had those problems at all. I ordered from a third-party seller in the United States from New York City, so I have not had any of those issues, but I just have seen other people have those issues, so it is something to keep in mind depending on who you're buying from. So do a little bit of research about the seller, see if anyone else has had issues with that seller. Personally, I've been totally happy, and quite honestly, the cost of a laser tube is not that expensive when compared to how much money I'm making with the machine. To me, that's the maintenance, the maintenance cost of having an expensive machine that you have to maintain. I just run routine maintenance on my machine. I want to be very careful with it, especially because it is a very large purchase for me. It is still, even though I made my money back from it, it's still a very big purchase. I don't usually spend that much money on art supplies, on one art supply, I should say. I spend quite a bit of money on individual art supplies that add up over time, but this was a very big purchase, and it is for a lot of hobbyists as well. So it's something to consider, that you do have to run maintenance on it, and that to me is just part of the whole process. I have had a couple of questions, such as, do you need to use a filter? I have not used any filter. I haven't heard of anyone using a filter, and it doesn't say in the instructions to use the filter as far as when you vent it out. Maybe that would help. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Ask Flux for sure if maybe that would help with smell on the outside. Maybe if you're in an apartment or in a house that's close to your neighbors, that's something to look into and consider. I have not personally done that. Something I have seen before was in Thailand, I want to say. I'll put it on the screen if I'm wrong, but there are attachments that allow you to have kind of like an unlimited bed size, where you can have the piece underneath, and then you have the laser extender so that it can focus to that piece depth, and then you can cut really large pieces even with the Beamo. I don't know anything about that beyond seeing somebody else who had done it in the Facebook group, but I thought it's worth mentioning because if you are used to outsourcing your laser cutting parts, or if you have a friend who can get you those parts from those countries, those are some options. Or if you live in those countries, I don't know who's watching this, so maybe you live there and you're lucky and you have that attachment available to you, but it's not available in the US as of right now. But I am perfectly fine using my Beamo's size. Like I mentioned before, I've created this piece and this piece, which are relatively large pieces that have been created all with the Beamo in the standard bed size in the honeycomb. Like I mentioned before, I have some DIYs already on the channel, and I will have some more DIYs coming. I also have a very specific top 10 tips for creating fine art with a laser cut machine. So please do leave me comments. I will get back to you as soon as I see your message. Feel free to also reach out to me on Instagram. I've linked all my social media links in the description box below. If you have some projects going on that you want to share, please do tag me or share it with me. I love connecting with people on Instagram, especially. I'm very active on Instagram, so if you shoot me a message, I will respond. So please do reach out, say hi, show me what you're working on. If you just purchased your machine or you're thinking about purchasing, congratulations, have fun with it, get excited because you're about to have a whole lot of fun. I was so excited by my machine. I'm so excited to still have my machine, and I love sharing that excitement and that process with every one of you. So thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time, remember to create love and travel on. See you next week.